Housewife's confession. When exhaustion almost ended my marriage, Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old stay-at-home mother in suburban Denver, Colorado, appears to live the perfect American dream. Married to David, a successful software engineer and mother to 2 young children, her days are filled with endless household tasks, school pickups, and maintaining the picture-perfect home. But beneath the surface, Sarah is drowning in exhaustion, resentment, and the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. When a series of overwhelming events pushes her to her breaking point, Sarah makes a desperate decision that threatens to destroy everything she's worked to build. This raw, honest portrayal follows 4 pivotal days that force Sarah to confront the reality of modern motherhood, the invisible labor that goes unrecognized, and the courage it takes to ask for help before it's too late. Set against the backdrop of Denver's changing seasons, this story explores themes of mental health, marriage equality, parental burnout, and the often unspoken struggles of maintaining identity while caring for others. Through authentic dialogue and relatable situations, we witness one woman's journey from silent suffering to finding her voice, and how a marriage can either crumble under pressure or emerge stronger through honest communication. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or overwhelmed in your own home, you're not alone. This channel is a safe place for every woman who's lived through love, heartbreak, and the silent battles of family life. Subscribe now and let's share our stories together, because your voice matters here. Chapter 1. The Perfect Storm. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through Sarah Mitchell's already fragile sleep at 5:47 a.m. on a gray October morning in Denver. She'd been awake since 4:30, her mind racing through the day's endless to-do list, but those 13 minutes of attempted rest felt like a cruel joke. The Colorado autumn air carried a bite that seeped through their suburban home's windows, promising another day of juggling heating bills with comfort. Sarah's feet hit the cold hardwood floor of their master bedroom, the chill shooting up through her spine. Beside her, David continued his deep, peaceful breathing, his dark hair tousled against the pillow, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in his wife's chest. She envied that peace, that ability to sleep without worry, without the constant mental inventory of everyone else's needs. The house at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive had been their dream when they'd bought it 6 years ago. A classic colonial revival with white shutters and a wraparound porch, nestled in the safe, tree-lined streets of Littleton. Back then, Sarah had imagined hosting neighborhood barbecues, watching their children play in the large backyard, creating the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. Now, as she padded quietly down the hallway, passing family photos that seemed to mock her with their frozen happiness, the house felt more like an elegant prison. "Mommy, I had a bad dream," came a small voice from behind Emma's slightly open bedroom door. Sarah paused, closing her eyes for just a moment. Emma, their 5-year-old, had been having nightmares for weeks. The kindergarten transition hadn't been smooth, and Sarah suspected the anxiety was manifesting in her sleep. She pushed open the door to find Emma sitting up in her twin bed, clutching her worn stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts. "Come here, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, settling on the edge of the bed. Emma's room was painted a soft lavender, with hand-painted butterflies Sarah had spent weeks working on when they'd first moved in. Those butterflies seemed to flutter mockingly now, reminders of when she'd had time for such projects. Emma crawled into her lap, her small body warm and trusting. "There were monsters in the closet, Mommy. Big, scary ones with red eyes." Sarah stroked Emma's fine blonde hair, so much like her own had been at that age. "There are no monsters here, baby. Just shadows playing tricks. Should we check together?" They performed the familiar ritual of monster checking, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Emma's fears calmed, but Sarah could feel her own anxiety mounting. The clock in Emma's room read 6:03 a.m. She had exactly 57 minutes to get both kids fed, dressed, and ready for school, prepare David's coffee, exactly how he liked it, pack lunches, locate Emma's missing library book, and somehow make herself presentable enough to face the perfectly put-together mothers at school drop-off. "Can you stay with me until I fall asleep?" Emma asked, her blue eyes wide and hopeful. Sarah's chest tightened. She wanted nothing more than to curl up with her daughter, to feel that simple connection, that pure love. But the morning routine was a precisely choreographed dance, and one misstep would throw off the entire day. "I need to get breakfast started, sweetheart, but I'll leave your door open and I'll check on you in a few minutes, okay?" Emma's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the resignation of a child who'd learned not to ask for too much. That look, that premature understanding, made Sarah's heart crack a little more. Downstairs in the kitchen, Sarah moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Coffee first, David's preferred dark roast, measured exactly, timed perfectly for when he'd stumble down at 6:45. Then breakfast prep. Emma's whole grain waffles with fresh berries arranged in a smiley face, 8-year-old Jake's scrambled eggs with cheese, cut up fruit in divided containers for their lunchboxes. The kitchen was Sarah's domain, designed with white marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that required constant maintenance to look pristine. She'd once loved cooking, had dreamed of teaching her children family recipes, of creating a warm gathering place. Now it felt like a laboratory where she performed the same experiments daily, measuring out nutrition and love in equal portions, hoping the formula would somehow be enough. Jake appeared at 6:32, his brown hair sticking up at impossible angles, wearing yesterday's Pokemon t-shirt inside out. "Morning, buddy," Sarah said, automatically reaching to fix his shirt. "How about we put this on the right way?" "I like it backwards," Jake mumbled, sliding into his usual chair at the breakfast bar. "Tommy Peterson wore his shirt backwards yesterday, and Mrs. Martinez said it was creative." Sarah bit back her first response, that Tommy Peterson's mother probably didn't have to deal with the judgment of other parents, that she was tired of their family being anything less than perfect in public. Instead, she forced a smile. "Okay, but let's at least fix the inside-out part. Creative is great, but comfortable is important too." As Jake reluctantly allowed her to help him fix his shirt, Sarah heard David's shower starting upstairs, right on schedule. Everything in their house ran on David's schedule, his work calls, his gym sessions, his weekend golf games with clients. Sarah had organized her entire existence around maintaining his routine, ensuring he could walk out the door each morning, confident that everything at home would run smoothly in his absence. Emma wandered down at 6:41, dragging Mr. Peanuts and wearing mismatched socks. "I can't find my lucky socks, Mommy." "Which lucky socks?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "The pink ones with unicorns that Emma insisted she needed for every math test. The unicorn ones. I have math centers today, and I need them, or I'll get all the numbers wrong." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. The unicorn socks were in the dirty clothes hamper, forgotten in yesterday's laundry chaos. She had 47 minutes to get everyone ready, and now she needed to perform a sock miracle. "Let me check the dryer," she said, knowing full well they weren't there. She found David's lucky work socks instead. The navy blue ones he claimed gave him confidence in important meetings. Without thinking, she grabbed them and a pair of pink, regular socks. Back in the kitchen, she performed amateur sock surgery with fabric scissors, cutting unicorn shapes from an old pink pillowcase and quickly taping them onto the regular socks with clear tape. "There," she said, sliding them onto Emma's feet. "Emergency lucky socks." Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "They're perfect, Mommy. You're magic." For just a moment, Sarah felt that warm glow of maternal success, but it was immediately overshadowed by the realization that she'd just spent 15 precious minutes on sock modification while Jake's lunch remained unpacked and David's coffee was getting cold. David appeared at 6:58, dressed in his standard uniform of khakis and a button-down shirt, his hair perfectly styled with product. At 36, he still looked much like the man Sarah had fallen in love with in college, tall, lean, with kind brown eyes and an easy smile. But somewhere along the way, that smile had become reserved for everyone except his family. "Coffee smells good," he said, grabbing his travel mug and the lunch Sarah had packed the night before. He kissed her cheek absently, already mentally at the office. "David," Sarah began, then stopped. She'd been about to ask him to handle Emma's drop-off, to give her just one morning to breathe, but the words died in her throat as she saw him checking his phone, his brow furrowed with work concerns. "What is it, hun?" he asked, not looking up from his screen. "Nothing, just to have a good day." He was gone by 7:05, leaving behind the faint scent of his cologne and the weight of all the unspoken words Sarah carried. The school drop-off was its own special form of torture. Sarah had learned to time their arrival perfectly, early enough to avoid the longest car line, late enough to miss the cluster of perfectly dressed mothers who gathered near the entrance every morning like a judgmental Greek chorus. But today, Emma's shoe came untied right as they reached the school entrance, causing a delay that put them squarely in the middle of the social minefield. "Sarah, how lovely to see you," called out Madison Pierce, the PTA president whose blonde highlights never showed roots and whose yoga pants probably cost more than Sarah's grocery budget. Madison approached with her usual air of concerned perfection, flanked by her regular companions, Jennifer Walsh, whose 3 children were straight A students and accomplished athletes, and Crystal Martinez, who somehow managed to work part-time as a real estate agent while maintaining a Pinterest-worthy home. "How are you holding up, sweetie?" Madison asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You look so tired. Are you getting enough rest?" Sarah forced a smile, acutely aware of her hastily thrown-together appearance. Yesterday's jeans, a sweater that might have a stain on it, hair in a messy bun that wasn't the fashionable kind. "Oh, you know how it is," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice light. "Busy season with all the school activities starting up." "Of course," Jennifer chimed in, "though I have to say I don't know how you manage without any help. Crystal and I were just talking about our cleaning ladies. Such a lifesaver. And Madison, didn't you mention your meal delivery service?" The conversation continued around Sarah, these women discussing their various forms of domestic assistance like they were comparing vitamins. Sarah nodded and smiled, but inside she was calculating. David's salary was good. They were comfortable, certainly better off than many families. But between the mortgage, car payments, Emma's potential tutoring needs, Jake's baseball league fees, and the 1,000 other expenses that seemed to multiply daily, there was no room for cleaning ladies or meal services. More than that, Sarah knew that David saw her role as managing the household. When they'd made the decision for her to stay home after Emma was born, it had seemed natural, economical even. Daycare costs for 2 children would have eaten up most of Sarah's teaching salary anyway. But somewhere along the way, managing the household had become being entirely responsible for everyone's daily existence while maintaining the appearance of effortless perfection. "Well, I should get these 2 to their classrooms," Sarah said, gently taking Emma's hand and nodding toward Jake, who was already headed toward the building. "Of course. Oh, but before you go," Madison said, "I wanted to mention the Fall Festival Committee. We're still looking for volunteers for the decorating committee. It would be such a fun way to get involved." Sarah's stomach dropped. The Fall Festival was 3 weeks away, and she'd been hoping to avoid the elaborate volunteer commitments that seemed to come with every school event. "I'll have to check my calendar," she said weakly. "Wonderful. I'll put you down as a maybe. The meetings are just twice a week, and we probably won't need more than 10 or 15 hours of decorating time. It'll be so much fun." As Sarah walked away, Emma's small hand in hers, she felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on her shoulders. 10 or 15 hours, as if she had spare hours lying around somewhere, waiting to be filled with pumpkin garlands and autumn centerpieces. The drive home was quiet. Jake having been successfully delivered to his 3rd grade classroom, Emma settled with her emergency lucky socks and renewed confidence. But Sarah's mind was spinning with the day ahead. Grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning the house for David's parents' visit this weekend, researching tutoring options for Emma, calling the pediatrician about Jake's persistent cough, returning library books, picking up David's dry cleaning, preparing dinner, and somehow finding time to work on the freelance editing project that was already 2 days behind deadline. The freelance work had been her attempt to contribute financially to maintain some professional identity. But fitting client work around family needs had proven nearly impossible, and she was beginning to wonder if it was worth the additional stress. Back home, the house seemed to exhale around her, that particular silence that comes when children's chaos temporarily subsides. But instead of peace, Sarah felt only the pressure of time passing, of tasks multiplying in the quiet. She started with the breakfast dishes, loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. As she wiped down the counters, she caught sight of herself in the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, hollow-eyed, shoulders permanently hunched with tension, mouth set in a line that had once been capable of easy laughter. When had she become this person? When had the vibrant woman who'd once dreamed of travel and adventures and meaningful work been replaced by this efficient but exhausted shell? The doorbell rang at 9:43, interrupting her spiral into self-reflection. Through the peephole she saw Mrs. Henderson from next door, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. Eleanor Henderson was 72, widowed, and one of the kindest people Sarah had ever known. She'd been their neighbor since they'd moved in, always ready with a warm smile, emergency babysitting, or homemade cookies for the children. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, as Sarah opened the door. "I made too much of my famous tuna casserole last night, and I thought you and your family might enjoy some." The casserole dish was still warm, and the gesture brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. When was the last time someone had simply done something nice for her without expecting anything in return? That's so thoughtful, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you. Are you all right, sweetheart? You look a bit piqued. Sarah almost said, fine, automatically, the way she always did. But something in Mrs. Henderson's genuine concern, in her kind blue eyes, made the walls crack slightly. I'm just tired, I suppose. It's been a long week, and it's only Wednesday. Mrs. Henderson studied her with the wisdom of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried a husband, who'd seen enough of life to recognize when someone was drowning. Would you like some company? I was just about to make some tea. Sarah glanced back into the house, mentally calculating her to-do list, but the prospect of adult conversation, of sitting down for even 15 minutes, was too tempting to resist. Actually, that sounds wonderful. They settled in Sarah's living room, the morning light filtering through windows that Sarah had cleaned just 2 days ago, but which somehow already showed fingerprints and dust. Mrs. Henderson's presence made the space feel warmer, less like a showroom and more like a home. I remember when my children were young, Mrs. Henderson said, settling into the armchair with her tea. There were days when I thought I might simply disappear from exhaustion. People used to tell me to enjoy it because it goes so fast, but when you're in it, when you're living it minute by minute, it doesn't feel fast at all. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Did you ever feel like you were losing yourself? Like you were just dissolving into everyone else's needs? Oh, honey, Mrs. Henderson said softly. Every mother feels that way sometimes. The question is what you do about it. What do you mean? Well, you can keep trying to be everything to everyone until you have nothing left to give, or you can start figuring out what you need to stay whole, to stay yourself, and then ask for help making that happen. Sarah stared into her teacup, watching the steam rise. I don't think I even remember what I need anymore. It's been so long since I thought about myself as separate from everyone else's needs. When was the last time you did something just for you? Something that made you feel like Sarah, not just Mommy or David's wife? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah couldn't remember, literally, could not remember the last time she'd done anything purely for her own enjoyment, her own fulfillment. I used to write, she said finally, before the kids, before all this. I used to write stories, essays. I even had a few pieces published in small magazines. What stopped you? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Life stopped me. Diapers and sleepless nights and endless laundry and school meetings and doctor appointments and birthday parties and somewhere in all of that, I just stopped believing I had anything worth saying. Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted Sarah's hand. Oh, my dear, you have more to say now than you ever did before. You just need to remember that your voice matters too. They talked for another hour, and Sarah found herself sharing things she'd never said aloud, her fears about Emma's anxiety, her worry that Jake was becoming too dependent on screens, her loneliness despite being surrounded by family, her guilt about not being grateful for a life that looked perfect from the outside. Mrs. Henderson listened without judgment, offering gentle wisdom when asked, but mostly just providing the gift of being truly heard. When it was time for her to leave, she paused at the door. Sarah, dear, would you consider letting me help with the children sometimes? I know you have everything well in hand, but I miss having little ones around, and I think you could use a friend. The offer was so kind, so free of the competitive undertones that seemed to accompany every interaction with the school mothers, that Sarah almost cried again. That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to... You're not asking. So I'm offering. Next week, why don't you let me watch Emma and Jake for a few hours? Go somewhere by yourself, remember what it feels like to think your own thoughts. After Mrs. Henderson left, Sarah sat in her living room holding the warm casserole dish and feeling something she hadn't experienced in months, a tiny spark of hope. Maybe she didn't have to carry everything alone. Maybe asking for help wasn't failure but wisdom. But as the day wore on, as she moved through her endless tasks, that spark began to dim. The grocery store was crowded. Emma's teacher called to report that the emergency Lucky socks had fallen apart during recess, and Jake came home from school with a note about missing homework. By the time David walked through the door at 6:47 p.m., Sarah felt like she'd run a marathon while juggling flaming torches. How was your day? David asked, loosening his tie and heading straight for the refrigerator. Fine, Sarah said automatically, stirring the pasta sauce and trying to keep her voice level. How was yours? Busy. The Johnson project is turning into a nightmare, and my boss is breathing down everyone's necks about deadlines. David grabbed a beer and settled at the counter, scrolling through his phone while Sarah finished preparing dinner. This had become their evening routine, David decompressing from work, while Sarah managed the dinner, homework, bath, bedtime chaos that defined their evenings. "Dad, come see my Lego castle," Jake called from the living room. "In a minute, buddy," David replied, not looking up from his phone. Sarah watched her husband studying his familiar profile. When had they stopped really talking? When had their marriage become this parallel existence where they managed logistics but rarely connected? During dinner, Emma announced that she needed a costume for her school's upcoming Colonial Day. "When is it?" Sarah asked, though she was already dreading the answer. "Friday," Emma said cheerfully. "This Friday?" Sarah's voice came out higher than intended. "Emma, why didn't you tell me sooner? I forgot, but it'll be easy, right? I just need to look like a colonial girl." Sarah's mind immediately began spinning through the logistics, finding or making a costume in 2 days while managing everything else on her plate. "Maybe we can find something online and have it rushed," David suggested helpfully. "Everything will be picked over by now," Sarah said, "and rush shipping will be expensive. I'll figure something out." "You always do," David said with a smile that was meant to be supportive but felt dismissive. After dinner, David retreated to his home office to catch up on a few things, leaving Sarah to manage homework supervision, bath time, and the bedtime routine. By the time both children were settled in their beds, it was nearly 9 p.m., and Sarah felt like she could collapse. She found David in his office, still at his computer. "They're both down," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Great. Thanks, hon. I just need to finish this report." Sarah stood there for a moment, waiting for something, an invitation to sit down, a question about her day, acknowledgement that she'd been managing everything alone since 6 a.m., but David's attention remained fixed on his screen. "I'm going to take a bath," she said finally. "Sounds good. I'll be up in a bit." In the bathroom, Sarah ran hot water and added lavender bath salts, trying to create a moment of peace. But even in the bathtub, her mind wouldn't quiet. Colonial costume, grocery shopping, Mrs. Henderson's offer, Madison's volunteer recruitment, the editing deadline, Jake's cough, Emma's anxiety, David's distance. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the woman she used to be, the one who'd stayed up all night discussing literature and philosophy, who'd traveled to Europe with just a backpack, who'd believed she could write stories that mattered. That woman felt like a character from someone else's story now. As Sarah lay in the cooling bathwater, she made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would take Mrs. Henderson up on her offer. She would let someone else watch her children, and she would go somewhere by herself, not to run errands or handle family business, but just to be Sarah for a few hours. She didn't know yet that this simple decision would set in motion a series of events that would force her to confront every assumption she'd made about her life, her marriage, and herself. She didn't know that by Friday, everything she thought she understood about her carefully constructed existence would be turned upside down. But somewhere deep inside, beneath all the exhaustion and routine, a small voice was beginning to whisper that maybe, just maybe, she deserved more than this endless cycle of putting everyone else first. As she finally climbed into bed beside her already sleeping husband, Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine for just a moment what it might feel like to matter again. Chapter 2. Breaking Point. Thursday morning arrived with an unprecedented Colorado snowfall that caught the entire Denver metro area off guard. Sarah woke to the sound of her phone buzzing with automated school closure notifications, and her first thought wasn't relief at the unexpected reprieve, but panic at the complete destruction of her carefully planned day. She padded to the window, pulling back the curtains to reveal a world transformed. 6 inches of heavy, wet snow blanketed their neighborhood, turning Maple Ridge Drive into a winter wonderland that would have been magical if it hadn't represented complete chaos for her schedule. "No school today," Jake's voice carried from down the hall, followed by the thunder of small feet running toward their bedroom. "Snow day, snow day," Emma chimed in, her previous night's anxiety forgotten in the excitement of unexpected freedom. Both children launched themselves onto the bed, jarring David awake with their enthusiasm. "What's happening?" David mumbled, checking his phone with the automatic reflex of someone whose day began with email triage. "Snow day," Sarah said, her voice flat with the realization of what this meant. No school meant no child-free hours. No child-free hours meant no time with Mrs. Henderson, no moment to herself, no break from the constant demands of motherhood. "Oh no," David said, sitting up quickly. "I have the big presentation with the Johnson account today. There's no way I can work from home with the kids here." "I know," Sarah said, though inside she was screaming. Why was his work automatically prioritized? Why was it assumed that she would handle the disruption? Maybe I could take them to the office with me for a few hours, David suggested half-heartedly, already knowing it was impossible. A software company office isn't exactly child-friendly, Sarah replied. It's fine, I'll figure something out. David kissed her forehead gratefully. You're amazing. I don't know what I'd do without you. Once, those words had made her feel valued. Now they felt like golden handcuffs, beautiful but restrictive. As David showered and prepared for his day, as if nothing had changed, Sarah mentally reshuffled her entire schedule. The editing project deadline was tomorrow. The grocery shopping couldn't be postponed. They were out of milk and nearly everything else. The colonial costume still needed to be created from thin air. And now she had two energetic, cooped-up children to entertain all day. By 8:30 a.m., David was gone. Having navigated his SUV carefully down the snowy streets toward his temperature-controlled office, where adults spoke in complete sentences, and bathroom breaks weren't announced to the entire household. Sarah stood in her kitchen, still in her pajamas, watching Emma and Jake press their faces against the sliding glass door to the backyard, chattering excitedly about building snowmen and having snowball fights. "Can we go outside, Mom? Please," Jake asked, his breath fogging the glass. "After breakfast and getting dressed," Sarah said automatically. "But first, let's see what we have for a costume for Emma." She spent the next hour diving through closets and drawers, trying to create something resembling colonial clothing from their existing wardrobe. An old white blouse of her own, pinned and tucked, a long dark skirt she found in her college clothes box in the attic, a white apron fashioned from an old pillowcase. Emma tried on the improvised costume, and for a moment Sarah felt a flicker of pride in her resourcefulness. But then Emma looked in the mirror and frowned. "It looks homemade," she said with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. "Chloe's mom bought her costume online, and it has real buttons and lace and everything." The criticism hit harder than it should have. Sarah had spent precious time and creative energy crafting something from nothing, and it wasn't good enough. She wondered, not for the first time, if anything she did was ever truly good enough. "It looks authentic," Sarah said firmly. "Colonial girls didn't have fancy store-bought dresses. They made their clothes by hand, just like this." Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Sarah felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on her shoulders. The morning stretched endlessly. After bundling both children in snow gear and supervising an hour of backyard play that left the entryway covered in muddy slush, Sarah attempted to work on her editing project while the kids watched a movie. But concentration was impossible with constant interruptions. "Mom, can I have a snack? Mom, Jake won't share the good blanket. Mom, the movie is scary. Can you come watch with us?" Each interruption was reasonable, each need legitimate, but the cumulative effect was maddening. Sarah found herself rereading the same paragraph 6 times, her client's deadline looming like a sword over her head. At 11:47 a.m., her phone rang. David. "Hey, hun, how's it going?" "Fine," Sarah lied, glancing at her computer screen where she'd managed to edit exactly 3 pages in 2 hours. "Listen, I hate to ask, but could you possibly bring me my portfolio? I left it on the kitchen counter, and I really need it for the presentation." Sarah looked toward the kitchen, where the leather portfolio sat exactly where David had left it in his morning rush. The drive to his office was 45 minutes each way in good weather. With the snow and traffic, it would be at least 2 hours round trip with the kids. "David, I have the kids all day and I'm trying to work on the Martinson project. Can't the presentation wait? Or could you borrow someone else's materials?" "This is the biggest potential client we've had all year. The presentation can't wait, and nobody else has the specific data I need. Please, Sarah, I'll make it up to you this weekend." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar tug of guilt and obligation. David's work provided their income, their health insurance, their stability. Her freelance editing brought in maybe a few $100s a month when she could find time to complete projects. In the calculus of their marriage, his career took priority. "Okay," she said quietly, "I'll get the kids ready. You're a lifesaver. I love you." The drive to David's office was a nightmare. Emma threw up in the car 20 minutes in, apparently car-sick from the winding, snowy roads. Sarah had to pull over at a gas station to clean her up with baby wipes, change her clothes, and attempt to clean the car seat while both children shivered in the cold air. Jake chose this moment to have a complete meltdown about being hungry, even though Sarah had packed snacks. His cries echoed off the concrete walls of the gas station. Drawing stares from other customers, that made Sarah's cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I want Daddy!" Emma wailed, adding her voice to the chaos. Standing in that gas station bathroom, trying to clean vomit off a car seat while her children sobbed, Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. This wasn't how she'd imagined motherhood. This wasn't how she'd imagined her life. When they finally reached David's office, he met them in the parking lot with grateful kisses and promises to be home early. But Sarah could see his colleagues through the glass windows, dry and warm and focused on adult problems, and she felt a stab of envy so sharp it made her dizzy. The drive home was quieter but no less stressful. Emma fell asleep. Jake was hypnotized by his tablet, and Sarah found herself gripping the steering wheel and trying not to cry. The editing project deadline had become impossible. She would have to email her client, admit that she couldn't complete the work on time, likely losing not just the money, but the professional relationship she'd worked months to build. Back home, the house felt like a disaster zone. Breakfast dishes still filled the sink. Snow gear dripped puddles across the entryway. The laundry that should have been switched over that morning sat damp and forgotten in the washing machine, probably starting to develop that sour smell that meant it would need to be re-washed. "I'm hungry," Jake announced the moment they walked through the door. "Me too," Emma added. "Can we have mac and cheese?" Sarah glanced at the clock. 2:17 p.m. In a normal day, lunch would have been finished and cleaned up hours ago. The afternoon routine would be underway. Quiet time, perhaps a few more pages of editing work, preparation for the evening schedule. Instead, she was starting from behind, trying to catch up to a day that had spiraled completely out of control. As she prepared lunch, her phone buzzed with a text from Madison Pierce. "Hi, just confirming you can make tomorrow's festival committee meeting at 10 a.m. So excited to have your creative input." Sarah stared at the message, her throat tightening. She'd never actually agreed to join the committee, but somehow Madison had interpreted her maybe as a commitment. The meeting was exactly when she'd planned to work on the editing project, her last chance to meet the deadline. Another text, this one from David. "Presentation went great. Taking the team out for celebratory drinks. Might be late tonight. You're amazing for making today possible." Sarah set the phone down carefully, afraid she might throw it if she held it any longer. David was celebrating with colleagues, toasting success that had been made possible by her complete sacrifice of her own day, her own work, her own needs, and he might be late, which meant she'd handle the evening routine alone too. "Mummy, you're burning the mac and cheese," Emma said quietly. Sarah spun around to see smoke rising from the pot on the stove. She quickly turned off the heat, but the bottom layer of pasta was stuck to the pan in a blackened mess. "It's okay," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "We'll just eat the top part." But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. After lunch, Sarah attempted to restore some order to the house while the children played, but every task seemed to multiply. Cleaning the bathroom revealed that Jake had somehow missed the toilet entirely that morning. Switching the laundry confirmed her fears. Everything would need to be re-washed. Trying to load the dishwasher, she discovered they were completely out of dishwasher detergent. The editing project sat on her laptop. 3 hours passed when she'd planned to finish it, mocking her with its incomplete status. At 4:30 p.m., Mrs. Henderson called. "Hello, dear. I heard about the snow day and thought you might like some help. Would you like me to take the children for a few hours so you can have a break?" The offer was so kind, so perfectly timed, that Sarah almost sobbed with relief. But then she looked around her disaster of a house, thought about the editing deadline, the colonial costume that still needed finishing touches, the dinner that needed to be planned and prepared. "That's so generous," Sarah said, "but I have so much to catch up on. I don't think I could really relax anyway." "Sometimes catching up is exactly what we need to do," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "Let me take them for just 2 hours. You don't have to relax. Just do whatever you need to do without interruption." Sarah felt tears threatening. "Are you sure? They're pretty wound up from being inside all day. Honey, I raised 4 children through plenty of snow days. I think I can handle 2 energetic little ones. Besides, I have hot chocolate and cookies, and they can help me make dinner." Emma and Jake love spending time here. 30 minutes later, Sarah watched from her front window as Mrs. Henderson led her children across the snowy yard to her house, Emma clutching her hand trustingly, Jake chattering excitedly about something. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. For the first time in months, Sarah was completely alone in her own house. She stood in her living room, listening to the absolute quiet, and felt something approaching panic. What should she do first? The editing project, the laundry, the dishes. the dinner preparation, the costume finishing. Each task seemed equally urgent and impossible. Instead of tackling any of them, Sarah found herself walking upstairs to her bedroom and sitting on the edge of the bed. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, finding the message from her editing client. "Hi, Sarah. Just checking in on the Martinson project. Looking forward to receiving the completed edit by end of day tomorrow as discussed. Thanks." She stared at the message, calculating. She had maybe 6 hours of work left on the project. It was now 5 p.m. Even if she worked until midnight, she'd need to wake up early to finish before the deadline. And that was assuming no more interruptions, no family crises, no unexpected demands on her time. Sarah opened a new email and began typing. "Dear Margaret, I am so sorry, but due to unexpected family circumstances, I won't be able to complete the Martinson project by tomorrow's deadline. I understand this puts you in a difficult position, and I take full responsibility. If you're able to extend the deadline to Monday, I can guarantee completion by then. If not, I completely understand if you need to find another editor. Again, my sincere apologies. Best, Sarah Mitchell." She stared at the draft for a long moment before hitting send. In that email, she was acknowledging professional failure, likely losing income her family needed, admitting that she couldn't balance everything expected of her. But instead of feeling worse, she felt a strange sense of relief. For once, she'd been honest about her limitations, instead of promising impossible things. With the editing deadline pressure temporarily lifted, Sarah found herself walking to her closet. In the back, behind clothes she never wore anymore, she found an old shoebox. Inside were journals from her college years, notebooks filled with story ideas, drafts of essays she'd never submitted anywhere. She pulled out a leather-bound journal, one David had given her for their first anniversary. "For all the stories you're going to write," he'd said then. The first 20 pages were filled with her handwriting, character sketches, plot outlines, the beginning of what might have been a novel about a young woman navigating early marriage. The rest of the journal was blank. Sarah sat on her bedroom floor, snow still falling outside the window, and read her own words from 8 years ago. The voice on those pages was confident, hopeful, full of dreams about the stories she would tell, the impact she might have on readers. When had she stopped believing she had stories worth telling? She found a pen and for the first time in years began to write, "I am disappearing." Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like a photograph left in sunlight. Each day, a little more of who I used to be fades away, replaced by lists and schedules and other people's needs. I wake up thinking about everyone else's day, and fall asleep having forgotten to think about my own. I have become a supporting character in my own life. The words poured out of her, months of suppressed feelings and observations flowing onto the page. She wrote about the loneliness of being surrounded by family, but never truly seen, about the guilt of wanting more than what everyone else considered enough, about the fear that she'd lost herself so completely that she might never find her way back. She was so absorbed in writing that she didn't hear the front door open, didn't notice David calling her name until he appeared in their bedroom doorway. "There you are," he said, loosening his tie. "Where are the kids?" Sarah quickly closed the journal, feeling caught in some kind of transgression. "Mrs. Henderson has them. They're making dinner together." "Oh, that's nice." David sat on the bed, not noticing her flushed cheeks or the emotional vulnerability written across her face. "The presentation was incredible. Johnson loved the projections, and we're basically guaranteed the contract. This could mean a promotion, maybe even a bonus." He was excited, animated in a way Sarah rarely saw anymore. She wanted to share his enthusiasm, but all she could think about was how his success had been built on her complete sacrifice of the day. "That's wonderful," she said, trying to infuse her voice with warmth. "We should celebrate this weekend. Maybe get a babysitter, go to that new restaurant downtown." Sarah nodded, but inside she was calculating. A babysitter cost money. The new restaurant would be expensive, and when would she find time to research babysitters, make reservations, arrange the logistics of an evening out? "Sarah, you seem distracted." She looked at her husband, really looked at him. He was a good man, she reminded herself. He worked hard. He loved their family. He'd never intentionally hurt her. But somewhere along the way, they'd fallen into a pattern where his needs, his career, his emotional well-being took priority over hers. "I had to cancel the editing project," she said quietly. David's expression shifted to concern. "What happened?" "Today happened. The snow day, driving your portfolio to the office, taking care of the kids, trying to keep up with everything. I couldn't make the deadline work." "Oh, honey, I'm sorry." Maybe next time you could... Next time I could what? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Plan better? Manage my time more efficiently? Be more organized? David looked startled by her tone. I was just going to suggest maybe we could find more childcare options for when you have deadlines. With what money, David? And when would I have time to research and arrange childcare? And why is it my responsibility to solve every logistical problem in our lives? The questions hung in the air between them. David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly unsure how to navigate this unfamiliar territory. I didn't realize you were feeling so overwhelmed, he said finally. Sarah felt a bitter laugh escape. When would you have realized it? When do we ever talk about how I'm feeling, what I need, what I want? We talk all the time. We talk about your work, the kids' schedules, household logistics. When was the last time you asked me about my dreams, my goals, what I want for myself? David was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the neighborhood in white silence. What do you want? He asked finally. The question was so simple, but Sarah found herself unable to answer. She'd spent so long focusing on everyone else's wants and needs that her own desires felt foreign, almost selfish. I don't know, she whispered. I've forgotten how to want things for myself. David reached for her hand, but she pulled away, not ready for physical comfort when the emotional distance between them felt so vast. I should get the kids, she said, standing up. Mrs. Henderson has done enough. Sarah, wait. Let's talk about this. But Sarah was already heading downstairs, already shifting back into the role of mother and household manager. The journal lay forgotten on the bedroom floor, her words of truth and pain waiting to be discovered or ignored. At Mrs. Henderson's house, Sarah found her children happily helping to make soup, their faces flour-dusted from making homemade bread. They looked content, cared for, loved in the simple way that Mrs. Henderson seemed to offer so naturally. They've been angels, Mrs. Henderson said, hugging Emma close. We've had such a lovely time, haven't we? Mrs. Henderson taught me how to knead bread, Emma announced, and she told us stories about when she was little. Can we come back tomorrow? Jake asked hopefully. Mrs. Henderson caught Sarah's eye over the children's heads. You look like you got some good work done, she said quietly. Sarah nodded, though work wasn't exactly what she'd accomplished. Thank you. Really, I can't tell you how much this meant. Anytime, dear, and Sarah, remember what I said about asking for help. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Back home, the evening routine felt different somehow. As Sarah supervised baths and bedtime stories, she found herself really listening to her children, noticing things she'd been too rushed or tired to see before. Emma's anxiety wasn't just about kindergarten. She was worried about being good enough, about disappointing the adults in her life. Jake's clinginess wasn't just a phase. He was picking up on the tension in the house, the unspoken stress that hovered over their family like a storm cloud. After the children were settled, Sarah found David in the living room, staring at the journal she'd left upstairs. I read some of it, he said quietly. I hope that's okay. Sarah's first instinct was anger, invasion of privacy, boundaries crossed. But then she saw his expression, the genuine confusion and hurt in his eyes. I had no idea you felt this way, he continued. Why didn't you tell me? When? Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from him. When you're on work calls? When you're rushing out the door? During the 30 seconds between kids' bedtime and when you fall asleep? David was quiet, and Sarah could see him mentally reviewing their days, their conversations, their interactions. I thought we had a good system, he said finally. I thought you were happy. I was, or I thought I was. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person and became a function. I exist to make your life run smoothly, to manage the children's needs, to keep the house running. But nobody manages my needs, David. Nobody makes sure I'm okay. I ask how your day was. And I always say fine, because what else can I say? That it was exhausting, that I feel invisible, that I'm losing myself piece by piece every day. You have enough stress with work. I didn't want to burden you with mine. David set the journal aside and leaned forward. Your feelings aren't a burden, Sarah. They're part of our marriage, part of our life together. Are they? When was the last time we made a decision based on what I wanted instead of what was practical, or what was best for your career, or what was easiest for the family schedule? The question hung between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth. I want to fix this, David said. Tell me how to fix this. Sarah looked at her husband, this man she'd loved for over a decade, and felt a mixture of hope and exhaustion. I don't think it's something you can fix, David. I think it's something we both have to work on together. But first, I need to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of everyone else. What does that mean? I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep disappearing into everyone else's life and pretending it's enough. They talked until nearly midnight, the most honest conversation they'd had in years. David shared his own feelings of pressure and responsibility, his fear of not providing enough for their family, his assumption that Sarah's contentment meant their arrangement was working. Sarah talked about her lost dreams, her professional ambitions that had been put on hold indefinitely, her need for identity beyond wife and mother. They didn't solve anything that night, but they began to see each other clearly for the first time in years. As they finally headed to bed, David paused at the top of the stairs. "The journal," he said. "You should keep writing. You have important things to say." Sarah nodded, but inside she was already planning. Tomorrow she would face whatever consequences came from missing the editing deadline. She would deal with Madison's expectations and Emma's costume and Jake's needs and all the endless demands of their daily life. But she would also make time to write, to remember who she was beneath all the roles she played. She would start asking for help, even when it felt uncomfortable. She would begin the long process of finding herself again. The snow had stopped falling, leaving their neighborhood transformed and clean. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, she could be transformed too. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Friday morning dawned crisp and clear, the snow already beginning to melt under an unexpectedly warm Colorado sun. Sarah woke with a strange sense of anticipation, as if the previous night's conversation with David had shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere of their house. But reality intruded quickly. Emma's colonial day was today, and despite the improvised costume, Sarah could see her daughter's anxiety mounting as she got dressed. "What if the other kids laugh at me?" Emma asked, staring at herself in the mirror. "You look perfect," Sarah said, adjusting the apron one final time. "Remember, colonial girls were strong and brave. They had to be resourceful, just like you." Emma straightened her shoulders, trying on the confidence her mother offered. "Like when you made my emergency lucky socks." Exactly like that. The school drop-off felt different this morning. Instead of avoiding the cluster of perfectly dressed mothers, Sarah found herself walking directly toward them, Emma's hand confidently in hers. "Sarah?" Madison Pierce called out, her smile bright but her eyes assessing Emma's obviously homemade costume. "How lovely, so authentic." "Thank you," Sarah replied evenly. "Emma and I worked on it together. It was a wonderful opportunity to teach her about resourcefulness and making do with what you have." Jennifer Walsh nodded approvingly. "That's such a valuable lesson. Though I have to say Chloe's costume from Amazon was surprisingly affordable." "I'm sure it was beautiful," Sarah said, "but there's something special about creating something with your own hands, isn't there, Emma?" Emma nodded solemnly. Colonial girls had to be resourceful, just like Mommy. As they walked toward Emma's classroom, Sarah felt a small victory. She hadn't apologized for her choices, hadn't made excuses for doing things differently. It was a tiny step, but it felt significant. After dropping off both children, Sarah drove home with a plan. She would spend 2 hours writing, not editing for clients, but writing for herself. Then she would call Margaret, her editing client, to discuss the missed deadline professionally and honestly. After that, she would begin researching childcare options, not as a luxury but as a necessity for her mental health and professional development. But as she pulled into her driveway, she saw Mrs. Henderson standing on her front porch, her face creased with worry. "Sarah, dear, could I speak with you for a moment?" Something in the older woman's tone made Sarah's stomach clench. She hurried across the yard, noting how Mrs. Henderson's usually steady hands were trembling slightly. "What's wrong?" "I had a call from my daughter in Phoenix this morning. My son-in-law had a heart attack yesterday evening. He's in intensive care, and Patricia needs me to come help with the grandchildren." Sarah's heart sank, not just from concern for Mrs. Henderson's family, but from the selfish realization of what this meant. Mrs. Henderson had become her lifeline, her one source of support and understanding. "Of course you need to go," Sarah said immediately. "Is there anything I can do to help? Drive you to the airport?" "My nephew is picking me up in an hour, but Sarah—" Mrs. Henderson reached out and took her hands. "I'm worried about leaving you right now. Yesterday you looked like a woman on the edge of a precipice." Sarah felt tears threatening. "I'll be fine. You need to focus on your family. Promise me you won't disappear back into that cycle of putting everyone else first. Promise me you'll ask for help when you need it." "I promise," Sarah said, though she had no idea how she'd keep that promise without Mrs. Henderson's steady presence next door. After helping Mrs. Henderson carry her suitcase to her nephew's car, Sarah stood in her empty house feeling more alone than ever. The plan for writing felt impossible now, frivolous in the face of real family crisis. Instead, she found herself stress cleaning, attacking the house with an intensity that bordered on manic. By the time she needed to leave for school pickup, the house was spotless, but Sarah felt hollowed out, as if she'd scrubbed away part of herself along with the dirt. The afternoon brought new challenges. Emma came home from school in tears, not because anyone had mocked her costume, but because she'd spilled paint on it during art class and was convinced she'd ruined everything. "It's just paint, sweetheart," Sarah said, examining the blue smear across the white apron. "We can wash it out." "But it won't be perfect anymore," Emma sobbed, "and Mrs. Rodriguez said we might take pictures for the school newsletter, and now I look messy." Sarah knelt down to Emma's eye level, recognizing her own perfectionist tendencies reflected in her daughter's distress. "Emma, listen to me. Real colonial girls got paint and mud and food on their clothes all the time. They worked hard, and they got messy, and that was okay. The most important thing isn't looking perfect. It's being brave and kind and doing your best. But what if the other kids who matter will care about who you are, not what your costume looks like? And the ones who judge you for a paint stain? Well, they're not the kind of friends you want anyway." Emma's sobs slowed as she considered this wisdom. "Really? Really? Besides, I think the paint stain makes you look like a girl who's been living an adventure, and adventures are always worth a little mess." As Sarah helped Emma out of the costume and into play clothes, she realized she was giving her daughter advice she desperately needed to take herself. When had she become so afraid of being imperfect, of letting anyone see her struggling? The phone rang as she was starting dinner preparation. Margaret, her editing client. "Sarah, I got your email about the deadline. I have to say I'm disappointed. This puts me in a very difficult position with my author." Sarah's stomach churned, but she forced herself to remain professional. "I completely understand your disappointment, and I take full responsibility. I can have the project completed by Monday morning, or I can provide you with the names of other editors who might be available for a rush job. Monday might be too late. The author has a book launch event Tuesday, and she was hoping to incorporate some of your suggestions into her presentation." "I'm truly sorry," Sarah said. "If there's any way to make this right, please let me know." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Actually, there might be. Could you possibly work through the weekend? If I could have it by Sunday evening, that might salvage the situation." Sarah's first instinct was to say yes, to promise whatever was needed to fix her professional failure. But then she thought about David's celebration dinner plans, about the writing she wanted to do, about the promise she'd made to Mrs. Henderson to take care of herself. "I can commit to having it done by Monday morning," she said carefully. "I understand if that doesn't work for your timeline, but I want to be realistic about what I can deliver." "I see." Margaret's tone was cool. "Well, I suppose I'll have to make other arrangements. Please do send what you've completed so far. Perhaps another editor can work from your draft." After hanging up, Sarah sat at her kitchen counter staring at her hands. She'd just lost a significant source of income and possibly damaged her reputation in the small freelance editing community. The practical side of her mind was calculating the financial impact, worrying about how to tell David. But underneath the practical concerns was something else, a small stubborn sense of pride. For once she'd been honest about her limitations instead of making promises she couldn't keep. When David came home that evening, Sarah was prepared for his reaction to the lost client. She'd rehearsed explanations, justifications, apologies, but David surprised her. "You did the right thing," he said, after she'd explained the phone call. "Better to be honest than to overpromise and burn out completely. But the money, we'll figure out the money. What we can't figure out is how to get you back if you disappear completely into everyone else's needs." It was such an unexpected response that Sarah felt tears starting. "I don't know how to balance it all, David. Everyone else seems to manage so much better than I do." "Do they? Or do they just hide their struggles better?" That evening, as they put the children to bed, Sarah found herself really present in the routine instead of mentally planning tomorrow's tasks. She listened to Jake's elaborate story about his day, helped Emma pick out clothes for tomorrow, read bedtime stories with full attention instead of rushing through the pages. Later, as David cleaned up the kitchen, Sarah opened her laptop and began working on the editing project. But this time, instead of frantically rushing to meet impossible standards, she worked steadily, carefully, taking breaks when her concentration wavered. Around 10 p.m., David appeared with a cup of tea. "How's it going?" "Better than expected, actually. I think I can finish this by Sunday afternoon and still have time for other things." "What other things?" Sarah looked up at her husband. "I want to start writing again. Really writing, not just editing other people's work. And I think I want to apply for some part-time teaching positions for next fall." David sat down across from her. "Teaching? You haven't taught in years." "I know. I'm probably rusty, and it would mean changes for all of us. But I miss having professional identity, contributing in a meaningful way, and I think I'd be a better mother and wife if I felt more fulfilled as an individual." "What about the kids, schedules, all the things you manage now?" Sarah took a deep breath. "We'd have to figure it out together. Real childcare, maybe a house cleaning service, definitely better division of household responsibilities. It would cost money and require major adjustments. But it's what you want?" "It's what I need," Sarah said quietly. "I need to feel like myself again." They talked until nearly midnight, sketching out possibilities, discussing logistics, acknowledging the challenges that would come with major changes. David asked thoughtful questions about her career goals, her timeline, her concerns about balancing work and family. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like they were partners planning their future together, instead of two people managing parallel lives. Saturday brought its own tests. David had planned a celebration dinner for his successful presentation, but Emma woke up with a fever, and Jake was scheduled for a baseball game that had been moved due to the previous day's snow. In the old dynamic, Sarah would have automatically cancelled the dinner plans, handled the sick child, and figured out transportation for Jake's game, all while assuring David that it was fine, that they could celebrate another time. Instead, she presented the situation to David as a shared problem requiring shared solutions. "Emma needs to stay home with someone who can monitor her fever and give her medicine on schedule," Sarah said. "Jake really wants to go to his game, especially since they rescheduled it. And we both want to celebrate your success. How do we make this work?" They brainstormed options. David could take Jake to the baseball game while Sarah stayed home with Emma. Then they could order takeout from their favorite restaurant and have a quiet celebration at home, or they could ask one of Jake's teammates' parents for a ride and both stay home with Emma. Or they could postpone the celebration dinner until Emma was feeling better. "What do you want to do?" David asked. It was such a simple question, but Sarah realized David rarely asked for her preference when scheduling conflicts arose. Usually, she just absorbed whatever solution required the least disruption to everyone else. "I actually think staying home with Emma and ordering takeout sounds perfect," she said. "We can have a celebration that includes the kids, and Emma will feel better knowing we're both nearby." The evening turned out better than any restaurant dinner could have been. They ordered pizza and chocolate cake, let the kids eat in the living room while watching movies, and played board games with Emma between medicine doses. "This is the best celebration ever," Jake announced, chocolate cake frosting decorating his chin. "Can we do this every time Daddy gets a promotion?" "We might need to pace ourselves on the cake," David laughed, "but I like the idea of celebrating at home." After the children were asleep, Sarah and David sat on their couch with glasses of wine, talking about work, dreams, and the tentative plans they were making for their future. "I called my mom today," David said. "Told her about your teaching idea." Sarah tensed slightly. David's mother had strong opinions about traditional gender roles and had never been shy about sharing her thoughts on Sarah's parenting choices. "What did she say?" "She was actually supportive, said she wished she'd had more opportunities when she was raising kids and that times are different now. She offered to help with childcare if we need it." Sarah nearly choked on her wine. "Your mother offered to help with childcare." "I know. I was surprised too. But she said seeing Emma's confidence at the school play last month made her realize that having a mother who pursues her own goals might be good for the kids." They talked about childcare logistics, about how to research teaching positions, about the financial implications of Sarah returning to work. They discussed household responsibilities and how to create more equitable distribution of daily tasks. "I want to be clear about something," Sarah said as they prepared for bed. "This isn't just about me wanting a career. It's about us creating a marriage where both people get to be whole individuals, where both of our dreams and goals matter." "I understand," David said, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that we'd gotten so far off track." "We both let it happen," Sarah replied, "but I think we can fix it." Sunday morning brought unexpected visitors. Madison Pierce and Jennifer Walsh appeared at Sarah's door at 9 a.m., armed with coffee and pastries and concerned expressions. "We heard about your little situation at school pickup on Friday," Madison said, settling into Sarah's living room as if she'd been invited. "What situation?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew. "Well, Emma's costume for one thing," Jennifer said gently. "And then some of the mothers mentioned you seemed a bit stressed lately. We just wanted to check in, see if you need any support." Sarah felt her defenses rising. These women had never offered genuine friendship before. Their concern now felt more like intrusion than care. "I appreciate you stopping by," Sarah said carefully, "but I'm not sure what you mean by a situation." "Oh, honey," Madison said with exaggerated sympathy. "We all go through rough patches. The important thing is to ask for help before things get too overwhelming. Jennifer and I were just saying that we'd be happy to help you get connected with some resources." "What kind of resources?" "Well, there are some wonderful parent coaches who can help with time management and organization, and I know a fantastic therapist who specializes in helping mothers adjust to their roles. Sometimes we just need professional guidance to help us cope better." The implication was clear. Sarah's struggles were personal failures that required professional intervention, not systemic problems that required structural changes. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah said, standing up. "I'm not having trouble coping with my role as a mother. I'm making intentional changes to create a more balanced life for myself and my family." Madison and Jennifer exchanged glances. "Of course," Madison said quickly. "We just want you to know that we're here if you need anything. Though I do hope you'll reconsider the festival committee. We really could use your help." After they left, Sarah found herself shaking with anger. How dare they show up uninvited to diagnose her problems and offer unsolicited solutions? How dare they assume that wanting more than constant self-sacrifice indicated some kind of personal failure? She called David, who was at the grocery store with the kids. "You won't believe what just happened," she began, and told him about the unexpected visit. "That's incredibly presumptuous," David said. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I was making intentional changes, not having a breakdown. But David, this is exactly what I was talking about. The expectation that mothers should be grateful for exhaustion, that wanting your own identity is somehow selfish or problematic. You're absolutely right, and I'm proud of you for standing your ground." That afternoon, while Emma napped off her lingering fever and Jake played quietly in his room, Sarah sat at her kitchen table and began writing. Not editing, not managing household tasks, but writing her own thoughts and experiences. She wrote about the pressure to be perfect, about the invisible labor that kept families functioning, about the loss of identity that came with total self-sacrifice. She wrote about marriage dynamics and social expectations, and the courage it took to ask for more. The words flowed easier than they had in years, and Sarah realized how much she'd missed this feeling of creating something meaningful, of having thoughts worth expressing. When David and Jake returned from the store, they found Sarah still writing, completely absorbed in her work. "Mum's been typing forever," Jake informed David, "but she looks happy." David read over Sarah's shoulder, nodding as he recognized their recent conversations reflected in her words. "This is really good, Sarah. You should think about submitting it somewhere. It's not finished yet," she said, "but maybe someday." That evening they established new Sunday routines. David took over bath time and bedtime stories, giving Sarah 2 uninterrupted hours to work on her writing. It was a small change, but it felt revolutionary. As Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked, "Mommy, are you writing a book?" "Maybe someday," Sarah replied. "Would you like that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I think you should write about brave colonial girls who make their own rules." Sarah smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I think I just might." Later that night, as David handled the dishes and Sarah finished the editing project that had caused so much stress earlier in the week, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. She'd lost a client, but gained self-respect. She'd disappointed some people, but stayed true to her own needs. She'd faced judgment from other mothers, but stood firm in her choices. Most importantly, she'd begun to remember who she was beneath all the roles she played, and for the first time in years, that person felt worth fighting for. The editing project was completed by Sunday evening, exactly as she'd promised. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest work done within realistic parameters. Sarah emailed it to Margaret with a professional note, then closed her laptop with a sense of completion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose between self-sacrifice and self-respect. But tonight, Sarah felt hopeful about her ability to navigate those choices with integrity. As she prepared for bed, she found the leather journal David had given her years ago and wrote a single sentence. "Today I chose myself and the world did not end." It was a small victory, but it felt like the beginning of something much larger. Chapter 4. The New Foundation. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of Jefferson Elementary School's main office, holding a folder containing her resume, teaching certifications, and letters of recommendation that she'd spent hours updating and perfecting. The morning October sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and she could feel her heart beating rapidly against her ribs. Inside that folder was evidence of who she'd been before motherhood, the young teacher who'd inspired reluctant readers, who'd created innovative curriculum, who'd believed education could change lives. The question was whether that woman still existed somewhere inside her, ready to emerge after years of dormancy. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, the same words she'd been repeating since David had dropped her off. He'd wanted to reschedule his morning meetings to be here for moral support, but Sarah had insisted she needed to do this alone. Some moments of growth had to be solitary. The interview was for a part-time 4th grade position, perfect for easing back into teaching while maintaining flexibility for family needs. Sarah had applied on impulse 2 weeks earlier, then immediately second-guessed herself. Her teaching experience felt ancient, her confidence shaky, her knowledge of current educational practices rusty at best, but Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in her mind. "You can keep trying to be everything to everyone until you have nothing left to give, or you can start figuring out what you need to stay whole." The principal, Dr. Martinez, was a warm woman in her 50s who put Sarah immediately at ease. "I have to tell you," Dr. Martinez said, scanning Sarah's resume, "your references are extraordinary. Mrs. Patterson from Lincoln Elementary called me personally to recommend you. She said you were one of the most naturally gifted teachers she'd ever supervised." Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with disbelief. "That's very kind of her to say. Tell me about your time away from teaching. I see here that you've been home with your children for several years." This was the question Sarah had dreaded and practiced for. How to explain that she hadn't just been home with her children, but had been drowning in domestic responsibilities, losing herself piece by piece, until she'd almost forgotten she was capable of anything beyond managing other people's lives. "It's been an invaluable experience," Sarah said carefully. "Being home with Emma and Jake has taught me so much about child development, about different learning styles, about patience and creativity. But I've reached a point where I'm ready to bring those insights into a classroom setting again." "What draws you back to teaching now?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I realized I'd forgotten who I was outside of being a mother and wife. Don't get me wrong, those roles are incredibly important to me. But I need to be a whole person to be my best in those roles. I need professional fulfillment, intellectual challenges, the satisfaction of contributing to something bigger than my immediate family." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of self-awareness we value in our teachers. Someone who understands that taking care of yourself enables you to better care for others." The interview continued for 45 minutes, covering everything from classroom management philosophy to current educational technology. Sarah found herself speaking with a confidence she'd forgotten she possessed, drawing connections between her parenting experiences and pedagogical insights that surprised even her. "I'd like you to do a brief teaching demonstration," Dr. Martinez said. "Nothing elaborate, just show me how you'd introduce a concept to 4th graders." Sarah had prepared for this possibility. She pulled out materials she'd brought, a collection of everyday objects and a simple science experiment about density and buoyancy. "I'd start with something that contradicts their expectations," she said, placing a large piece of wood and a small metal coin in front of Dr. Martinez. "Which one will sink if we drop them in water?" "The wood," Dr. Martinez replied automatically, then paused. "Wait, that's not right, is it?" "Exactly. Most kids, and adults, assume heavier means it will sink. But it's about density, not weight. Once they're surprised and curious, they're ready to learn the real science." Sarah demonstrated how she'd turned the simple experiment into a full lesson involving prediction, observation, hypothesis formation, and real-world applications. Dr. Martinez took notes, nodding frequently. "When can you start?" Dr. Martinez asked as the demonstration concluded. Sarah's heart leaped. "Are you offering me the position?" "I am. Pending reference checks and paperwork, of course. But yes, I think you'd be an excellent addition to our team." Driving home, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. She'd done something entirely for herself, something that required her own skills and knowledge and passion. The part-time schedule would mean she could still be present for her children, but she'd also have professional identity, intellectual stimulation, and financial independence. At home, she found David working from his home office, while Emma and Jake played quietly in the living room. They'd established new routines over the past 3 weeks, David taking on more household responsibilities, the children learning to entertain themselves during certain hours, everyone adjusting to Sarah's need for time and space to pursue her own goals. "How did it go?" David asked, emerging from his office the moment he heard her car in the driveway. "I got it," Sarah said, still barely believing it herself. David's face broke into a huge smile. He picked her up and spun her around their kitchen, both of them laughing like teenagers. "Mom got a job," Emma announced, having overheard from the living room. "Are you going to be our teacher?" Jake asked hopefully. "Not your teacher specifically," Sarah said, kneeling down to their level. "But I'll be teaching children your age at a different school." "Will you still be our mom?" Emma asked with the serious concern of a 5-year-old. "Always and forever," Sarah assured her. "Being a teacher doesn't change being your mom. It just means I'll be both things at the same time." That evening, they celebrated with pizza and ice cream, the children excited about their mother's new adventure, even if they didn't fully understand what it meant. Sarah called her parents in California, who were thrilled and proud. David called his parents, who were more reserved but ultimately supportive. The only call Sarah dreaded was the one to Madison Pierce. As PTA president, Madison would inevitably learn about Sarah's new position and would likely have opinions about mothers working outside the home. But when Sarah finally made the call, Madison's reaction surprised her. "Oh, how wonderful," Madison said, her enthusiasm seeming genuine. "You know, I've been thinking about going back to work myself. Real estate was my career before kids, and I miss it more than I expected." "Really?" Sarah hadn't imagined Madison as anything other than the perfect stay-at-home mother. "Between you and me," Madison continued, her voice dropping to a more honest tone, "some days I feel like I'm losing my mind with just home and school activities. I love my children, but I need something that's just mine, you know?" Sarah did know. And suddenly Madison seemed less like a judgmental adversary and more like another woman struggling to balance identity and motherhood. "Maybe we should have coffee sometime," Sarah found herself saying. "Compare notes on working mother strategies." "I'd love that. And Sarah, I owe you an apology for that morning when Jennifer and I came over. We were projecting our own fears onto your situation. You were actually ahead of all of us in figuring out what you needed." After hanging up, Sarah reflected on how often women judged each other instead of supporting each other, how isolation kept them from realizing their struggles were universal rather than personal failings. The following weeks brought rapid changes to the Mitchell family routine. Sarah spent hours preparing lesson plans, rediscovering the joy of creating learning experiences for children. David took over more of the evening routine, becoming more involved in homework help and bedtime stories. Emma and Jake adjusted to having a mother who was sometimes unavailable, but more present and engaged when she was with them. The new dynamic wasn't without challenges. There were mornings when everyone was rushing and lunchboxes went unpacked. There were evenings when Sarah was grading papers, while David managed dinner and baths. There were moments when both parents felt overwhelmed by the juggling act, but there were also unexpected benefits. Emma, seeing her mother pursue goals and handle challenges, became more independent and confident. Jake started helping with household tasks without being asked, proud to contribute to the family team. David discovered he actually enjoyed the hands-on parenting he'd previously left mostly to Sarah. Most importantly, Sarah began to feel like herself again, the woman who loved literature and learning, who had ideas worth sharing, who could inspire young minds and make a difference in the world beyond her own home. 6 weeks into the school year, Sarah received an email that would change everything even more dramatically. "Dear Mrs. Mitchell," it read, "I hope this email finds you well. My name is Rebecca Chen, and I'm the editor of Modern Motherhood magazine. A mutual friend forwarded me an essay you wrote about the invisible labor of motherhood and the challenges of maintaining identity while caring for others. I found it deeply moving and incredibly well written. Would you be interested in discussing publication? We're always looking for authentic voices that speak to the real experiences of contemporary mothers." Sarah read the email 3 times before it sank in. The essay she'd written that Sunday afternoon, the one she'd shared with just a few friends, had somehow made its way to a national publication. She immediately called David at work. "They want to publish my essay," she said without preamble. "Who wants to publish what essay?" "Modern Motherhood magazine. Remember the piece I wrote about losing yourself in motherhood?" Apparently, Lisa shared it with her sister, who shared it with a friend, who happens to know the editor. "Sarah, that's incredible. Are you going to do it?" "I think so. Yes, definitely yes." That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah and David sat at their kitchen table discussing this unexpected opportunity. Publishing the essay would mean sharing their most private struggles with thousands of strangers. It would mean acknowledging publicly that their marriage had nearly cracked under the pressure of unexamined expectations. "Are you comfortable with people knowing about our problems?" Sarah asked. David considered this seriously. "If it helps other couples avoid the same mistakes we made, then yes. And honestly, I'm proud of how we've worked through this. We could have kept ignoring the problems until they destroyed our marriage. Instead, we faced them and came out stronger." Sarah worked with Rebecca Chen over the next week, revising the essay, crafting it for publication. The process reminded her how much she'd missed intellectual collaboration, the satisfaction of refining ideas and language until they expressed exactly what she wanted to say. The essay, titled "The Disappearing Woman: How I Almost Lost Myself in Motherhood," was published in Modern Motherhood magazine's December issue. The response was overwhelming. Sarah's email inbox filled with messages from women sharing their own experiences of identity loss and recovery. Mothers thanked her for articulating feelings they'd never been able to express. Several readers asked if she was planning to write a book. "I think you should," David said one evening, scrolling through the reader responses. "You clearly struck a nerve. There are a lot of women out there who need to hear what you have to say." Sarah had been thinking the same thing. The essay had opened something inside her, a voice that had been quiet for too long but was now demanding to be heard. "I want to write about all of it," she said. "The pressure to be perfect, the isolation, the way marriages can drift apart when couples stop seeing each other as individuals, but also the possibility of change, the courage it takes to ask for more, the way families can actually become stronger when everyone gets to be whole people." Over the Christmas break, while Emma and Jake played with new toys and David tackled home improvement projects, Sarah began outlining what would become her first book. She wrote early in the mornings and late at night, stealing moments between her teaching responsibilities and family life. Mrs. Henderson returned from Phoenix just before New Year's. Her son-in-law recovered and her daughter's family stabilized. Sarah rushed over to share her news, the teaching job, the published essay, the book project. "I'm so proud of you, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, tears in her eyes. "But I'm not surprised. I saw that spark in you from the beginning. It just needed the right conditions to catch fire. I couldn't have done any of this without your encouragement," Sarah said. "You were the first person to tell me that my feelings mattered, that asking for help was wisdom, not weakness. Oh, honey, I just saw what was already there. You did the hard work of believing you deserved more." As winter melted into spring, Sarah's life settled into new rhythms. Teaching fourth grade brought daily joy and challenges. Her students adored her, responding to her genuine care and creative lessons. Parent conferences revealed that her own parenting experience made her particularly effective at connecting with families and understanding children's home dynamics. The book project progressed steadily. Sarah wrote about the mythology of effortless motherhood, the economic realities that trapped women in unpaid domestic labor, the way society benefited from women's invisible work while offering them little recognition or support. But she also wrote about hope, about marriages that could evolve, about children who benefited from seeing their mothers as complete people, about communities of women supporting each other's growth rather than competing for perfection. David became her first reader and most honest critic, offering insights from his perspective as a husband who'd had to examine his own assumptions about marriage roles. "You're not angry at me in this chapter," he said one evening, reviewing a section about their early struggles. "I was never really angry at you," Sarah realized as she said it. "I was angry at a system that taught us both that your career mattered more than mine, that your time was more valuable, that my fulfillment was optional. You were just following the same script I was. The script that nearly destroyed our marriage, but didn't. That's the point. We rewrote it." By Sarah's first Mother's Day as a working mother, the changes in their family were evident to everyone. Emma had grown more confident and independent, often proudly telling people about her mother's job and her writing. Jake had become David's sous chef, taking pride in helping prepare family dinners. David had discovered aspects of parenting he'd never experienced when he was merely the fun parent who showed up after Sarah had handled the hard parts. At the Mother's Day brunch David organized, Sarah looked around the table at her family. Messy, imperfect, but genuinely happy. They were all more themselves than they'd been a year ago, and somehow that made them better together. "I have an announcement," Sarah said as they finished their pancakes. "My book has been accepted for publication." The children cheered, not entirely understanding what this meant, but sensing it was important. David reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "When will it come out?" Emma asked. "Next spring, and I'm going to dedicate it to all of you because you taught me that love means supporting each other's dreams, not sacrificing them." That afternoon, Sarah sat in her backyard, watching Emma and Jake play while David cleaned up the kitchen, a reversal of roles that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. She opened her laptop and began working on the book's conclusion. "The myth of selfless motherhood," she wrote, "tells us that good mothers disappear into their families, that our love is measured by our willingness to sacrifice our own needs completely. But what if the opposite is true? What if the greatest gift we can give our children is the example of adults who pursue their own growth, who fight for their own dreams, who model the truth that love multiplies when we honor everyone's wholeness?" She paused, watching Emma build an elaborate castle in their sandbox while Jake practiced batting swings with an imaginary ball. What if teaching our children that they deserve to be seen, heard, and supported as complete individuals starts with demanding the same for ourselves? The afternoon sun was warm on her face as she continued writing, crafting words that she hoped would help other women find their way back to themselves. Around her, the sounds of her family's contentment provided a soundtrack to her work. Not the chaos of competing needs she'd once known, but the harmony of people who had learned to support each other's flourishing. Sarah Mitchell was no longer disappearing. She was, for the first time in years, fully present in her own life, and that presence made everything else possible. As she wrote, she could hear Mrs. Henderson working in her garden next door, humming an old tune. David's laughter drifted from the kitchen, where he was apparently having a conversation with someone on the phone about his own recent promotion. Emma called out to show her the towers she'd built, while Jake narrated an elaborate game involving superheroes and saving the world. This was the life she'd been afraid to ask for, messy, complicated, full of competing demands and imperfect solutions. But it was also a life where everyone got to be themselves, where love meant supporting growth rather than demanding sacrifice, where the woman at the center of it all was not disappearing, but finally, fully visible. Sarah smiled and kept writing, crafting words that would help other women remember. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to be a whole person, not just a supporting character in everyone else's story. And most importantly, asking for that wholeness isn't selfish. It's the foundation upon which everything else beautiful can be built. The end. And now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if my story touched your heart today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next confession. Give this video a like if it resonated with you, and share it with another woman who needs to know she's not alone. Together, our voices are stronger.